in a play where the central character is so central, everybody else tends to get relegated to second-tier status. Hamlet is the absolute center of this play, and everybody else then is effectively a supporting player. Nobody approaches him in depth of character, in range of character, in just sheer interest. Everybody else is just a little flat and minor. We don't know that much about them. Shakespeare is brilliant in the way he can hint at little things about these characters and the way he has them interacting, but ultimately it all drives back to Hamlet. But by singling out some of those characters and saying, well, all right, let's make an effort. Let's just focus on that one for a little bit and see, maybe we can figure out what the hell is going on there. That can make that character more interesting, but also reflect back on the primary purpose of the play, which is to elucidate the character of Hamlet himself. Shakespeare doesn't necessarily want you dwelling too much on the minor characters, but we have that luxury because we are reading this and not watching it play out in real time. Now, to that end, I want to talk a little about Ophelia. I have mixed feelings about Ophelia. I find her to be quite maddening. I've seen a lot of versions of Hamlet be produced. I've never seen a particularly good Ophelia. My heart goes out for actresses who get cast in this role. Some of the more notable ones are real favorites of mine. Helena Bonham Carter, Kate Winslet was in a very notable production of it. Even Julia Stiles had a little turn in a relatively minor variation on Hamlet, and they were all really good, but still the character is just frustrating. I don't know what to make of her. She appears in only 5 of the roughly 20 scenes of this play. Her role is uncertain, whereas you can pretty much pigeonhole a lot of the other characters and say, well, all right, at least I can understand them as this. Polonius, maybe a lot of things, but I can just pigeonhole him for my use as kind of a fussy bureaucrat. That's an effective little bumper sticker identity for him, and I can work with that. Guildenstern and Rosencrantz, they are the half-witted friends who just sort of show up and they're very shallow, and they are a couple of tools that Hamlet can have fun beating up on. They might have rich interior lives, and some of their lines can be interpreted in a number of different ways, and you can even start to maybe even empathize with them a little in their plight. But at least they have that pigeonhole. There is no such pigeonhole with Ophelia. She is just evanescent. She slips right through your fingers. We get no speeches from her, really. Certainly no soliloquies or even asides. When Hamlet will just turn to the audience and say something, it has that feeling of he's talking directly to us, he's being authentic. This is him just sort of saying, all right, don't worry about them, it's just you and me now. And that gives us an access point to his character. And we see asides popping up from some of the other characters here and there. And that gives us a sense of who they are. We get none of that from her. Everything we know about her is her interaction with the other secondary characters, and she's usually used to bring them about. Some critics have noticed or have accused the play of using her strictly as a plot device. Just something that, okay, I gotta have a character do this so that Hamlet can react this way. And so they just plug her in and say, there you go, that makes it happen, problem solved. And certainly throughout the play, the only interactions we see with her, she is endlessly used by the other characters. Her father uses her to spy on Hamlet. Hamlet uses her to report back his antic disposition to the king. Everybody is using her, including the audience, because we can see her as a device, and we can discard her because she is unimportant in the larger picture of the play. But still, there's something undeniably sweet about her. We want to know more about her, in great distinction, I would argue, from any of the other supporting characters. Ultimately, she makes no sense, and I find that kind of disappointing, heartbreaking, because I am failing to make sense of her. And I understand that I am, as an audience member or a reader, a little complicit in that, because yes, I am using her to understand the other characters. Exactly how old she is a bit of a mystery too. She seems at times like a very young girl, like she has just blossomed into womanhood, which, let's face it, is probably a young teenager at this point in history. She has a sort of romance going with Hamlet based on letters that he has written to her largely. But think about that and what we know about him and his faculty for language. It's not inconceivable that when he is writing her florid love poetry, that maybe it's not super genuine. Maybe it's just him practicing his ability to write florid love poetry, and she just happens to be there. She is, after all, the only girl available as a love interest in this play. And even that is somewhat unavailable to him because they are separated by some rank. She is the daughter of Polonius, a high-ranking staffer to the king. She is not a princess herself. So there's some inappropriate ranking there. To say nothing of the fact that he is probably like maybe 10 years older or so. If she is a teenager, he is somewhere between 20 and 30. Exactly where everybody's going to have their opinions. She does arguably represent a safe harbor for Hamlet. If he wants to lead a normal life, if he wants to just settle down, get married, have some kids, and, wait for, all right, Claudius is going to croak one day and I'm going to take over. She is the logical path for that. But again, that's just her being used so that he can achieve something he wants. She is an opportunity to him to live out his own identity more than she is a person or an identity herself. Polonius uses her as an extension of himself. The scene where he starts off talking and giving instructions to Rinaldo is matched immediately with the second half of that scene of him giving instructions to Ophelia, and he just doesn't miss a beat. I'm talking to a government employee, I'm talking to my daughter. It's the same thing, right? So those are the two biggest figures, or two of the three biggest figures in her life, and they're both just using her all the time, not necessarily thinking about her, what she would want, what's okay with her. The other character that is big in her life, of course, is her brother, Laertes, whom we get the first real scene of the two of them is Act 1, Scene 3. Here, Laertes has just been given, in the scene before, has been given permission to return to Paris, where he will be living the life of a bon vivant, having fun, and doing all the stuff that he certainly doesn't want word of to get back to Norway, or Denmark, rather. And it's a very sweet little scene. And again, after all the busyness of the previous scene, this is actually fairly normal. This is a brother and sister saying goodbye. And it's really quite sweet. Laertes is giving some advice to his little sister. He is worried about her in her budding womanhood if he sees Hamlet prowling around, perhaps seeking to take advantage. And Laertes plays this big brother role in a kind of a heavy-handed way. Of course, what we know about him is that he is going back to Paris to go be a little less than moral and chaste himself. But he says in a simple command to her about her relationship with Hamlet, no more. And she just, no more but so? Think it no more. For nature crescent does not grow alone in thews and bulk, but as this temple waxes, the inward service of the mind and soul grows wide withal. This temple is the body, and as it ages, things can happen. And he's giving her this very moralistic advice about protecting her virginal morality and keeping Hamlet at a comfortable distance. And he goes on to give her a downright bizarre warning. Fear it, Ophelia, fear it, my dear sister, and keep you in the rear of your affection. Out of the shot and danger of desire, the chariest maid is prodigal enough if she unmask her beauty to the moon. Virtue itself scapes not calumnious strokes. The canker galls the infant of the young of the spring too oft before their buttons be disclosed. And in the morn and liquid dew of youth, contagious blastments are most imminent. Be wary then. Best safety lies in fear. Youth to itself rebels, though none else near. Which is curious, very poetic, and let's face it, a little scary. Fear your sexuality. Fear. Hamlet coming sniffing around. There is a fair amount of repression, I would say, in this, a fair amount of progression in this, I would say. He points out the difference between the head and the heart. Keep you in the rear of your affection. Let your emotions be over here, but your head is sitting there thinking about them. But that dwelling on it, it is almost a little sadistic. Fear gets repeated 1, 2, 3 times, I think, in this short speech. The moralism from someone we know is going to be very amoral when he gets to Paris. The horror of nature itself. There is nature imagery in here that he is recoiling from. That is all suggestive of a kind of repressed sexuality, or at least a guilt about sexuality, because that's what he's going to Paris to live out. So he is projecting upon her his own most dissolute identity, almost irrespective of who she is. So while this is on that one level a sweet little scene of a brother and sister saying goodbye and wishing one another in one way or the other the best, this is also him kind of talking to himself and ignoring or not caring about her identity. And that ending image, best safety lies in fear. Youth to itself rebels, though none else near. Without knowing anything about that, without parsing out the specifics of that line, it's an image of loneliness, right? None else near. That sense of keeping to yourself, keeping walled up within yourself, repressing yourself, limiting your outward behavior to an inward consciousness. Now, she she responds with questionable sincerity. And here's another instance of when an actor can step in and really add some color to these lines. But she also has the maturity and presence of mind to point out some of the hypocrisy in his stridency. I shall the effect of this good lesson keep as watchman to my heart, but, good my brother, do not, as some ungracious pastors do, show me the steep and thorny way to heaven, whiles, like a puffed and reckless libertine, himself the primrose path of dalliance treads and recks not his own reed. Don't tell me what to do if you're going to go do even worse. She is pointing out with some show of personality, some show of self-awareness, some show of ironic understanding that she knows what he is doing, as brothers and sisters will, and she knows his heart's in the right place, but, right back at you, bro. And then Polonius comes in and gives her the same moralistic attitude. But again, he's kind of ignoring her and talking to himself. When once Laertes leaves, he turns immediately to Ophelia, doesn't ask her, well, how are you, sweetie? But says, what is it, Ophelia, he hath said to you? Now, maybe that is concern for her and what he is doing. Maybe it's more concern about what the son is doing. Did he say anything to you about going back to Paris and doing all sorts of stuff that I am not supposed to know about? The immediate relationship that is established between father and daughter is that he expects her to be a snitch, to spy on her brother. He tells her directly, I must tell you, you do not understand yourself so clearly as it behooves my daughter and your honor. She is a reflection of him. And the conversation that they have is interesting in the way he just dismisses her. He asks her about Hamlet and her relationship with him, but it is clear that it is more out of concern for his own position at court, or out of concern for the position of the court in Hamlet's role as prince. He does not really seem to care that much about his daughter's feelings, but dismisses them outright. Ophelia says, he hath, my lord, of late made many tenders of his affection to me. Polonius says, affection? Pah! You speak like a green girl, unsifted in such perilous circumstances. A little condescending, but she just essentially takes it. He asks, do you believe his tenders, as you call them? She responds, I do not know, my lord, what I should think. Maybe she's being sincere there. Young girls can sometimes tell their dads all sorts of stuff. But he jumps in. Mary, I will teach you. Think yourself a baby, that you have taken these tenders for true pay, which are not sterling. Tender yourself more dearly, or, not to crack the wind of the poor phrase, running it thus, you'll tender me a fool. Again, she is the reflection of him. And the message that this young girl must be getting from this father is that she has no real worth. She has no real identity. But she wants to please dad. And so in Act 2, Scene 1, we get, as we saw earlier, her talking to Polonius and reporting Hamlet's bizarre behavior. And she's coming and she's telling him, okay, well, this is what, he came into my room one night and he was acting really weird and he did this. And just look at this short speech. Ophelia says, he took me by the wrist and held me hard. Then goes he to the length of all his arm, and with his other hand thus over his brow, he falls to such a perusal of my face as he would draw it. Long stayed he so, at last a little shaking of mine arm, and thrice his head thus waving up and down, he raised a sigh so piteous and profound that it did seem to shatter all his bulk and end his being. That done, he lets me go, and with his head over his shoulder turned, he seemed to find his way without his eyes, for out of doors he went without their help, and to the last bended their light on me. Which is her describing this little scene. But you know what jumps out at me in this? Thus. Now, again, you don't get a lot of stage direction in these plays, but when he buries stage directions in the lines, you got to assume that the actors are going to perform them. So when somebody says, and with his other hand thus over his brow, what do we think she's doing physically? Demonstrating this action. So she is performing Hamlet's insanity for her father. She is demonstrating he came in and he did this, and then he went and he did this. And you could see her maybe running around as Polonius is standing there trying to make sense of it all. And she is running all around miming what Hamlet did, performing it, putting on an appearance, which is, of course, what Hamlet said he was going to do. Just make it all outward behavior to indicate what is going on in the inside. It's all just an act. But of course, it's a play. It's not Hamlet putting on an act of being crazy. It's an actor playing Hamlet putting on an act to be crazy. And here it is Ophelia putting on an act to give an indication of Hamlet putting on an act or not being crazy. And of course, it's not Ophelia, it is an actor, not an actress, putting on an act, blah, 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 blah. So the levels of complications start compiling and compounding until you have no idea what's real and what's not. How can you judge someone's interior by behavior that is so convoluted by so many different factors? Factors we can't even know. Our next appearance is Act 3, Scene 1. Her father, as promised, is once again essentially pimping her to trip up Hamlet, to demonstrate or to go and elicit behavior from him. They suspect that Hamlet is mad with love. This was a popular theme in Renaissance theater, erotomania, as they called it, which sounds more fun than it probably was. But the idea that this is the motivation. And Polonius seizes on this, which of course, you can start to speculate, well, all right. He wants to believe that Hamlet is driven mad with love for Ophelia because Polonius sees Ophelia as a reflection of him. And so if everything is going to revolve around him, as he kind of likes it, that would make sense. Of course Hamlet is crazy in love with my daughter. She's the spitting image of me. And all of the chaos in the court, all of the problems of the court are really just about me in one way or the other. Polonius has a healthy self-image. He's a little egocentric, let's say. But he sets it up, and he gets the king and the queen in on this. He sets it up that, okay, you're going to just be here, and Hamlet's going to come in, and then you're going to have a nice little conversation. You're going to bump into him, and just see what he says. See what he has to mention. See what his behavior is, and we can judge from that. And if he is truly mad with love, we will be able to watch it because we're spying from outside. And so they all hide, except Ophelia. And Hamlet enters. And Hamlet has the most famous speech in Western literature, to be or not to be, which is invariably performed center stage, maybe a spotlight, him thinking quietly to himself, to be or not to be. And this slow, sincere meditation on suicide, on the afterlife, and the nature of existence itself is being watched from the other side of the stage by this young girl. Is she hearing it? Is she even aware of it? Is this soliloquy just a conceit of what's going on in his mind? Are we able to penetrate his mind? Or is this outward behavior that reflects on the mind? But then if we can see it, shouldn't she be able to too? And what's the effect on a young girl who perhaps got a little infatuated with the idea of being in love with the handsome prince? And she sees him, after having some bizarre behavior already, she is here supposedly getting an inside look into what is driving that bizarre behavior, and that is a deep and harrowing depression with suicidal tendencies. That's got to be kind of scary, kind of sobering. It's no longer just him being crazy. This is much more real. And maybe by her listening to her father and listening to her brother and keeping him at a distance, cutting him off, so to speak, maybe that has driven him to this, so that she is then culpable, blameable for his state. But again, you can see your own complicity in this. Because when he is on stage, and when he is offering up the most famous speech in Western literature, you're watching him. You are drawn to him. Oh, there's a girl over there. Yeah, I don't care. Yeah, she's nobody. Get rid of her. What purpose does she serve here? She's just in the way. Which is what she hears from everybody in her life. She goes up to him after this, and they actually have this conversation that her father wants so much, and asks a very awkward question after that, where he has seemingly bared his soul to the audience and perhaps aware that this young girl is watching him. But he has expressed his deepest, most harrowing thoughts and torments. And she comes up and says, "Good my lord, how does your honor on this many a day?" Yeah, you got to read the room. She's a little naive. But they have this little conversation. She asks to return letters that he has written to her, love letters. He denies that he ever did it. "I pray you, now receive them." "No, not I never gave you aught." Ophelia says, "My honored lord, you know right well you did, and with them words of so sweet breath composed as made the things more rich, their perfume lost, take these again, for to the noble mind rich gifts wax poor when givers prove unkind. There, my lord." She understands that these letters, these words of his have meaning. They have meaning for her, at least. She has interpreted them one way, and perhaps that's not what she sees them now as, but they still have a residual, inexpressible meaning for her. A sentiment, perhaps. But she feels betrayed again. They had this link, this one link. She has not a particularly honest relationship or open relationship with her father or her brother, And the sharing of these views with Hamlet was at least something that was a lifeline for her. And now he's just denying her that. No, I never thought enough of you for that. I didn't care. You were nothing to me. And for her, the words, Shakespeare loves words, the words have power yet. But she has been told to return these letters. Maybe she wants to, maybe she doesn't. But she is the dutiful daughter doing this. And Hamlet, being Hamlet, probably understands why. He knows that she is just a dupe of her father, and she cannot be trusted. And so he asks her, more taunting than inquiring, "Are you honest?" Ophelia asks, "My lord." Hamlet, "Are you fair?" Ophelia, "What means your lordship?" Hamlet, "That if you be honest and fair, your honesty should admit no discourse to your beauty." Ophelia, "Could beauty, my lord, have better commerce than worth honesty?" Interior and exterior. Beauty is exterior, honesty is interior. And notice how in this little speech you're getting a batting back and forth of some metaphors, showing that, all right, she might be young, she might be naive, but there is perhaps a little spark of something that tells you why Hamlet may have liked her to begin with. Hamlet doesn't have very many people who can keep up with him. And here, she's not going all the way there. She's not one of Shakespeare's more vibrant female characters, but she shows a little verbal ability, just enough that you want her to come out with more. But she can't quite get there. She never rises to that level of dominance, that level of interest. I truly, for the power of beauty, will sooner transform honesty from what it is to a bawd than to the force of honesty can translate beauty into his likeness. This was sometime a paradox, but now the time gives it proof. I did love you once, and you could see that burst of knotty, complicated thought is pulling away from her. So she seizes on that last line, "I did love you once." And she says, "Indeed, my lord, you made me believe so." Which isn't saying, "Yeah, I know," or "I loved you too." It's, "Yeah, you made me believe so." She is, once again, the victim. In this case, victimized perhaps by Hamlet, perhaps by her father, who is having her turn on Hamlet, or her brother. But that complicated relationship is crimping her. Hamlet tells her to go to a nunnery and then immediately asks, "Where's your father?" And she says, "At home, my lord," which is a lie. She has grown up enough that she knows to lie. It's to lie to protect her father. It's a lie to fulfill her father's purpose, but it is a lie. And Hamlet can smell a lie. So Hamlet is taking away from this conversation that he cannot trust her at all. And that while he was using her to report his craziness, now he knows that, all right, she might actually be spying on me, or I can't lower my defenses at all around her. So they're both pulling back from one another. The idealization that she shows for him is vaguely familiar. After he runs off, she gets a short speech, one of the very, very few that gives some idea of her character. Oh, what a noble mind is here overthrown! The courtiers, soldiers, scholars, eye, tongue, sword, the expectancy and rose of the fair state, the glass of fashion and the mold of form, the observed of all observers, quite down, and I, of ladies most deject and wretched, that sucked the honey of his music vows, now see that noble and most sovereign reason, like sweet bells jangled out of time and harsh, that unmatched form and feather of blown youth blasted with ecstasy. Oh, woe is me, to have seen what I have seen, see what I see. Now, she is alone on the stage at that moment. We are told right before then that Hamlet has exited. We're told right after then, re-enter King and Polonius. But she knows the entire time the King and Polonius have been watching. And there's something rather soaring and poetic about that little speech. Dare I use the word performative? Like this girl who feels so overlooked all the time, feels so ignored by her father all the time, so ignored by Hamlet all the time, is going to take advantage of this moment. With Hamlet walking off, her father walking on, to maybe fill up that silence and just grab at their ears a little on either end and let them know that she is a person too. And that last line, to have seen what I have seen, she has seen Hamlet walking off stage, and see what I see, her father and the king walking on, noting the staging of this scene. So that little tip of the hand, that she is aware of the stagecraft of this moment, makes me wonder if she is just taking this moment as an actor would, to fill up some silence, to perhaps exaggerate just a little with her description of Hamlet, so that she has something to say to get their ears. A courtiers, soldiers, scholars, eye, tongue, sword, he is everything to her. Almost the way in this soaring admiration of this character, almost the same way that Hamlet speaks about his dad. And that is not a particularly cuddly relationship either. That is not a sustaining relationship either. So you see her being left behind again, but maybe trying to get a little recognition and a little acknowledgement of who she is as a person, and not just as a reflection or a tool of the others. Act 3, Scene 2, Ophelia tolerates some pretty, I guess the word we would use today is inappropriate behavior from the prince. Prince today would get a serious HR seminar for this behavior. They're sitting down to watch the play. Hamlet says, "Lady, shall I lie in your lap?" Ophelia says, "No, my lord." Hamlet says, "I mean my head upon your lap?" Ophelia says, "Aye, my lord." Hamlet says, "Do you think I meant country matters?" And I think we know what that means. Those country folk. "I think nothing, my lord." "That's a fair thought to lie between maids' legs." "What is, my lord?" "Nothing." Or, perhaps with a little spin, "No thing." A little suggestive, a little saucy. Uh, yes, sexual harassment, but she is sitting there taking it. The hostility comes out as they are sitting there watching the show. Ophelia asks after the dumb show, "What means this, my lord? How do I interpret what just happened on the stage?" Hamlet says, "Marry, this is meeching maleccio. It means mischief." Ophelia, belike the show imports the argument of the play. Which play? The one they are watching or the one we are watching? Enter the prologue. "We shall know by this fellow. The players cannot keep counsel. They'll tell all." Ophelia, will he tell us what this show meant? She is struggling to understand. He is smarter than she is, and he knows the show anyway. Hamlet, aye, or any show that you'll show him. Be not you ashamed to show, he'll not shame to tell you what it means. Which again is starting to sound a little dirty. Always putting her in that very uncomfortable position. She is sitting next to her father, the king, and the queen. This is not the time to be flirting. Hamlet criticizes the prologue, says, "Is this a prologue or the posy of a ring?" Ophelia says, "'Tis brief, my lord." Hamlet shoots back, "As a woman's love." Now, he is conceivably, in this moment, talking about Gertrude and how she became so quickly in love with Claudius, forgetting about her recently deceased husband. From Ophelia's perspective, maybe she thinks he's talking about her, because she has effectively cut him off and tried to return his love letters and let him know in no uncertain terms that we are not in that kind of relationship. You can't talk to me that way. She feels guilty now. She knows that he has been more than a little crazy at this point, and she feels guilty about what she has done to further that. But now he is accusing her, in her perspective, perhaps, of being a driving force in that by cutting off love. The last time we see Ophelia is probably the most confusing scene. It's where she's crazy now. In the wake of her father being killed, we are given this scene where she seems pretty far gone. And here, an actor can have a lot of fun with this. Acting crazy is, very theatrical, and you can really go nuts with it. But it's so complicated to get this right, because she does seem crazy. But for what reason? And how are we supposed to react to that? I don't think the play is offering a clear answer. Should we feel bad for her? Should we say, well, she, the irony of irony, she was out to prove that Hamlet was crazy and she went crazy herself. In the wake of her father's death, you can feel bad for her, but, was he really such a great father? I don't know. Certainly with her brother off at Paris and Hamlet crazy, her father was her only connection to the world. She seems to have a kind of glancing relationship with the king and queen, but the king and queen are several ranks above her, so that's an unbridgeable gap. And they're also, a generation or so older, so that's a tough one to square as well. She has no other friends. Horatio at one point seems to be kind to her, and maybe that could blossom into something. Horatio serves that purpose well, but she is always alone in the same way Hamlet is always alone. So you can see the matching of these two figures again, the doubling of these two figures. But in that, we are almost always going to again get drawn more to Hamlet and feel bad ignoring the little girl off on the side, because she's just not that interesting. Her craziness is an afterthought. His is the central question of the play. And in fact, the beginning of Act 4, Scene 5, the Queen is even giving her the arm's length. The Queen's opening line, "I will not speak with her. I just can't be bothered." This girl just lost her father. She has nobody. And Gertrude, who's generally a decent person, just can't be bothered right now. Now, granted, she has an awful lot going on in her life, and, we all have those moments, but I will not speak to her. The imperiousness of that tone. The gentleman, the staffer from the castle, reports, "She is impertinent, indeed distract. Her mood will needs be pitied." The Queen asks, "What would she have?" Almost groaning it. The gentleman reports, "She speaks much of her father, says she hears there's tricks in the world, and hems and beats her heart, spurns enviously at straws, speaks things in doubt that carry but half sense. Her speech is nothing. Yet the unshaped use of it doth move the hearers to collection. They aim at it and botch the words up fit to their own thoughts, which, as her winks and nods and gestures yield them, indeed would make one think there might be thought, though nothing sure, yet much unhappily." She can't be understood. She has perhaps collapsed into her own mind. So there is outward behavior that people can witness, outward speech behavior that people can hear, but have no access to what her thoughts might be or what is going on inside. It's just chaos to them. They try to interpret, but that becomes a selfish act as well. They aim at it and botch the words up fit to their own thoughts. They try and understand her, but then they always reflect back on themselves, and everything she says seems to reflect back on what they're thinking or feeling or wondering, or what they want to project upon her, but not a clear access to what is going on inside her. And then she comes in and she starts wandering around, honestly, like she's drunk or something. She is insane at this point. She's mad. And she walks in, "Where is the beauteous majesty of Denmark?" And the Queen says, "How now, Ophelia?" And immediately with that, you assume, oh, well, maybe she's talking about Ophelia, or maybe she's talking about Gertrude. Where is the beauteous majesty? You're talking about beauty, all right? That's like a girly term, so she must be talking about the Queen, right? The beautiful majesty, the Queen. That makes sense, right? Because there's one line about beauteous majesty, and then the next line is voiced by the Queen. So you put those together, and you assume she's talking about the Queen. She could be talking about anybody. The beauteous majesty. Well, there are technically 3 royals floating around here. The king, the queen, and Hamlet. I think we can put the king to the side. Maybe it's the queen, but considering what we heard her speak, or how we heard her speak about Hamlet, the mold of form, the glass of fashion, he is beautiful. And he is gone now. Now, we have been told from the gentleman that she speaks much of her father. So that's shaped how we see this. And maybe she is talking about him there. And maybe she is just taking a liberal interpretation of the word majesty to include her non-royal father in that. He is majestic in his own right, perhaps. But it's not sure. We are still all just interpreting this. We're still just reading into it what we want, just like other people. And all of her little songs that she's wandering around, the gibberish that she is spouting, it's very easy to scan past that and say, well, you know, I don't know what's going on. It's crazy talk. She's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Why bother reading those words? Well, they're a little saucy. They're a little fun, a little dirty at times. Very unlike the Ophelia we have been getting to know, who is such a prim and proper daddy's girl, you get the sense. How should I, your true love, know from another one? By his cockle hat and staff and his sandal shoon. Now, I don't know what any of that means, but I'm looking at the word cockle hat and staff, and I'm thinking that would get the groundlings giggling. And then you go down just a little bit more. Tomorrow is St. Valentine's Day, all in the morning betime, and I, a maid at your window, to be your Valentine. Then up he rose and donned his clothes and ducked the chamber door, let in the maid, that out a maid never departed more. Wow! That's a little porno right there. Let in the maid, then out a maid never departed more. Let in the young girl to his bedroom, and then she left, not a maid, but a woman. That is not the sweet little girl that we have known so far. That is something a little bit more sexual. It is notably a story about, dare I say, the despoiling of a young girl's honor. Did Hamlet do such a thing? Did someone else? The suggestion is out there. You can't necessarily draw a concrete conclusion from any of it, but she is just dropping that note into the air to get you wondering, to get you speculating what it could mean. We just don't know. The two roles that she has been fulfilling here, the dutiful daughter of Polonius and the chaste love interest of Hamlet, seem to be colliding, and she has brushed them aside. If she has crossed the sexual threshold, let's say, that would be against her father's express wishes, against Hamlet's express wishes, or commands, let's say. Who is she if she is not the dutiful daughter and the chaste love interest? She has no character at all. She has effectively disappeared from this play. She's going to wander in and out. She has this little scene where she's out handing people flowers. Flowers are going to be a thing for her. And then she drifts on out, kind of like a breeze. Her brother comes in. He's angry about his father. We hear about that. But he's also now concerned about his sister because she comes back in, and the same ghost-like, ethereal vacancy in her character as she is dancing around, singing some suggestive remarks, but always pointing out a sense of her heartbreak. There is a consistent theme of feeling abandoned and lonely and forgotten. And we remember back to every other scene in this play that she has been in where she's just kind of there and then people ignore her. Her father ignores her. Hamlet ignores her. Everybody uses her. And then she disappears and, well, as the audience, we're happy to get rid of her. She was confusing. She was an impediment. I didn't understand what she was saying. I don't know what she was supposed to mean or represent. So, yeah, we're better off. Just get rid of her. Which is what draws us in even more, because we share that complicity. We share that guilt. We have failed to attend to her. Despite all of this disappearance, despite the constant sense that she's always on the outskirts of the story, she's always just lurking there in the shadow, just outside the spotlight of to be or not to be. She gets in death a kind of a haunting presence in this show. In Act 4, Scene 7, we get the report of her death around line 165. The king has been trying to entice Laertes to do the king's dirty work and get rid of Hamlet. When Gertrude walks in, Gertrude, who did not want to see Ophelia, she reports that Ophelia has drowned. Laertes, drowned? Where? And the story that the queen tells, or at least the portrait that it paints, is really quite beautiful. There is a willow grows aslant a brook that shows his hoar leaves in the glassy stream. There with fantastic garlands did she come, of crowflowers, nettles, daisies, and long purples, that liberal shepherds give a grosser name, but our cold maids do dead men's fingers call them. There on the pendant boughs her coronet weeds, clamoring to hang, an envious sliver broke, when down her weedy trophies and herself fell in the weeping brook. Her clothes spread wide and mermaid-like, a while they bore her up, which time she chanted snatches of old tunes as one incapable of her own distress, or like a creature native and endued unto that element. But long it could not be till that her garments, heavy with their drink, pulled the poor wretch from her melodious lay to muddy death. It is a remarkable little scene. You picture her out collecting flowers. We're told that they are crow flowers, nettles, daisies, and long purples of apparently various and unbeautiful names. Nettles, well, those are thorns. Some of these, I believe, are technically weeds. So they're not just a beautiful, bouquet of daisies or anything perfect and lovely like that. There's something kind of ugly in there too. There's something that is unseemly, but very natural. It's not perfect, but it's real. And when climbing a tree, the tree breaks and she falls into a stream. And her clothes, which you have to figure as a young girl of some position in the Renaissance era, fairly heavy, maybe perhaps fairly beautiful. And you get this image of her floating downstream, buoyed up by these clothes. Perhaps they've captured some air and she's floating and she is singing as she goes downstream. Perhaps the same songs that she has been singing, but this beautiful image of vulnerability and somewhat ungainly beauty, where the weight of her clothes, the weight of her exterior appearance slowly drags her down. And in that, or just before that, we are told that mermaid-like a while they bore her up. Mermaids. Mermaids are symbols of unattainable love. Sailors would say that they saw mermaids when they were out at sea for long, long stretches of time without girls. And, it's in the mind. It's what you want to see. So you would see one way off in the distance and say, yes, beauty, unattainable, but also a fantasy. She is an unattainable fantasy. She is unknowable. She is a myth unto herself. She is, nevertheless, in this image, I find a quite haunting presence in the play, because you feel bad for having always ignored her. You feel a little bad for always being vaguely irritated by how little of a person she was. Why couldn't she rear up and give back to Hamlet? Why couldn't she smack him and say, listen, you're being a dope. Bad things happen, these things happen, but Gertrude and your father-in-law or your stepfather, whatever, Claudius, they're happy, deal with it. Maybe if she was a different Shakespearean character, she could do that. Maybe if she was Viola from Twelfth Night, or Catherine from Taming of the Shrew, or even Juliet from Romeo and Juliet, she would have that reserve of character that she could do that, but she can't, because she is just Ophelia, and she is not that large a character. She is a minor character in this play. She never has the strength to rise up and be more. But in this moment, there is something so delicate that it's hard to shake that image once you really imagine it. There's a great painting, you can Google it, where you just see this beautiful young girl in a beautiful dress drifting down the stream, covered in flowers. The image is haunting, mainly because once you get it in your head, it's hard to forget it, but it's you relating to the image rather than the person that she has been throughout the play. The rest of the play, she's annoying. The rest of the play, you want to forget her. In that image, I think you see something that is worth remembering. And you can feel a little guilty about that from time to time, because the image is an image. The image is an appearance. It is art. It is not the reality. But why do we go to the play? For art or reality? Who's really to blame? By wanting to ignore Ophelia, are we responsible for killing her? And if you take Ophelia as a representative value for women in general, she is only one of two female characters here. If you take her as that representative value, what does that say about our tolerance for women in the social sphere? Are they easier? Is it easier to get on in life if you ignore them? Do we prefer them to be pretty pictures rather than human beings? If they won't fit our role or our definition of their role for them, what purpose do they serve at all? What value do they have? You can make these arguments. You can ask these questions. And you'll always come back to her wandering around in Act 4, delivering flowers and singing songs. And if you can make sense of the nonsense, that is probably you impressing upon her what you want to think to begin with, which is just another way of using her, just like Hamlet and her father.